we got some Americans. That's good. So we're happy to have you. Let us know where you're from. And I'm going to try and tell you, or leave time, I might say, for a few question and answers at the end. We do have a hard stop, which is fine because I'm just going to be showing you a lesson that you may in fact use. I hope you'll use sometime. Looking at how we can use ChatGPT. In other countries, they don't have access to ChatGPT. Most of the ones here do. And or whatever your access is. Like in China, it's Poe, things like this. Massachusetts, Italy. Oh, can I just come and talk to you personally? Some of you guys, especially Denmark. I am going to Denmark though in May on my way to Taylor Swift concert over in Stockholm. But we all knew that.
Awesome. That's awesome. Well, I have started the live stream, Holly, and I think just because we're a little short on time, I am perfectly fine with passing it over to you. If you're just joining us and you aren't aware, we had to shorten tonight's webinar just due to a scheduling conflict. I do apologize, but that doesn't mean we're not going to leave a little time for Q&A and a little bit of time afterwards. Obviously, special attention is going to get paid to any emails that come in. We want to make sure that your questions are answered and you had a good time. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can drop it in the chat. You can drop it into the Q&A. If you haven't met her before, Holly Clark is an absolutely inspiring educator. She works with teachers and students all over the world, but she's based in California, where she works with classes and students face-to-face, but gets to travel all over the world. You can hear her talking about her passport book. And so with that, she brings a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of worldview and experience that we love at Book Creator because we do have a global audience. And so we like to turn the mic over to Holly because she just brings a beautiful perspective and an absolute stunning career in education. And so without a further ado, you probably already know Holly, but if you don't, you're going to be dazzled. Here she is, Holly. It's all yours. Thank you.
No pressure, but thank you, David. So I want to start by saying, if you want to get to this book and have access to it later and look through it or share with someone else, you can get to that by going to infuse.link /GPT story. And David's going to put that in the chat for us in a moment. But I'm going to present from this book so you can see some of the things that happened in this classroom. So I did this with a teacher. Her name is Tracy Terwilliger, and I really want to give a shout out to her because as the kind of tech coach at places, I often I have to rely on the teachers to work with me. And Tracy had been using ChatGPT to write some letters, and she was like, and I went up to her, I went to all the teachers, I'm like, if you want to use ChatGPT, let me know. And she came to me, but here's what was up. She taught second grade. And my first response to her was, but you teach second grade. And she said, Holly, second graders can do anything. And for those of you who might not use second grade as your levels, this is year sevens. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. But because she is such a great teacher, we were able to do some really great things. So I'm going to take you inside of this book again. That link is inside of the chat, and we'll give it again later. But most of the time when people think of, and David, let me know if anyone's not able to hear this video, but most of the time when people think of ChatGPT or how students are going to use it, they go to this kind of model. This is South Park, and these are fourth graders who are now turning in, and we can watch the video, turning in like papers that are way beyond their level, not something they would normally create. So we'll take a funny look at this.
However, there were some essays that I'm very happy with. There was a really great essay from Clyde on the 1840s labor unions and their effect on the Industrial Revolution. Someone who never writes good essays, Butters, wrote an amazing piece on post-Cold War Poland and the changing provision of security. Feminist neoliberal perspective of post-war Afghanistan. By Eric Cartman. This week we have a new student to the Check Plus Club for an amazing essay called Writing a Policy About Improving the Rights of Migrant Workers. Let's hear it for Stan.
So that's kind of what we think of. We think fourth graders are going to start just putting in any of the papers that we give them, or fourth and up, and we're just going to be getting ChatGPT versions of papers. And what we know right now is that AI detectors don't work. Universities like Cornell University like Vanderbilt University, they've turned them off because there are too many false positives where it says, this paper was written 100% by AI, but the kid did not write it with AI. I've done that with my own writing and put it through an AI detector. And it said that a book I wrote in 2017 was 85% written by AI. And these AI detectors will give you a percentage. And so I think that teachers have felt really good, like, oh, I can put this through an AI detector and I'll know. But what we really need to step back from is this. Like, at some level, having kids work with AI and there being some AI in that paper isn't necessarily a bad thing. And this is what Cornell University writes about and what Vanderbilt University writes about. They said, you know, it's not a bad thing if they go to AI for help, for inspiration, to get a different way of looking at a paragraph. So we need to reframe that we're trying to gotcha from doing writing in ChatGPT. So I was thinking, well, then what would that look like? And so what you're going to see next is kind of what that looked like with these 7-year-olds. But what we wanted was to realize that we have kids, and those 7-year-olds, when they graduate, it's going to be about 2034 about. So if we are in 2024, that's 10 years from now, what ChatGPT version will we be at? And the people who are in charge of AI say that by 2024, AI will be 1 billion times smarter than the human mind. So that means that some tasks that we're used to doing are going to be shifted over to AI. I personally predict that within the next 2 to 5 years, I'm really more closer to 2, but I'm being nice with the 5, that we will just assume everything has been written at some level in conjunction with AI. We already do it with Grammarly, we do it with sentence completion in Google Docs. AI will not, I mean, we just won't need to ask anymore because there will be the assumption that this writing has happened with AI. Now, with that in mind, how do we look at this kind of differently? Because you might say, but students need to learn to write. Absolutely, they need to learn to write. I'm a language arts teacher, and I believe they need to learn to write. But now that's going to look different. So we wanted to have a goal that we wanted students to understand. First of all, how do we make good stories? And as second grader, we often have them write stories, but we do it like on a worksheet, and I'm not sure how much they get from it because they're like just writing what we talk about. Like we might say, write a story about your Christmas presents you got this year. And I'm sorry, there are people who are not celebrating Christmas in our thing, but something like that. And we force them to write about one thing because we feel like if every kid's writing about that, then we can grade that thing. And maybe a kid doesn't celebrate Christmas. Maybe a kid didn't get presents. And so we need to have other ways that we allow students, especially at the 7-year-old level, to be able to write stories. So another goal that we wanted is we wanted students to learn what ChatGPT was, because it's going to be important in their lives, and how they might collaborate with it. So this is what we were looking for. And we did this because we know that the new digital divide is going to be between those kids who can critically evaluate AI responses and communicate and collaborate effectively with the AI, because you simply won't be able to get a job in the future if you don't know how to work with AI. I don't know any job that won't be impacted by this. Maybe a hairdresser, maybe like a chef, but I still think it's going to be impacted by AI, just not as dramatically. Someone told me their kids were becoming chefs, and I was like, it was a superintendent I was working with, and I was like, that's the perfect job right now. Like, you don't have to worry so much about that. But if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, your job will work in symbiosis with AI. It won't be taken away from AI, but it'll have to work in symbiosis. So let's go to pedagogy before we look at what we did. So we know this. I wanted kids to have a mentor text of a short story. So we're going to go to ChatGPT to create that mentor text for the students, and then they're going to make it something better. And so we know that mentor text can strengthen students' critical thinking skills. When students are learning how to write, mentor text can be a valuable tool. And these pieces provide students with kind of like a roadmap if they're trying to find their own voices. And often we forget that. We just say, here's a worksheet. I want you to write a story on it. And we forget about this roadmap, these mentor texts. Well, ChatGPT can give us that in 15 seconds, which has not been possible before. Another pedagogical structure we were kind of being foundational in is that studying the structure of a story brings knowledge that can be transferred. And the transfer of knowledge is when we've learned something. We know that pedagogically. It's actually a kind of an advanced pedagogical structure. So we want to be able to transfer that writing to your own short story while learning from the mentor text transfers beyond the classroom in this way. Teachers should always consider transfer of learning through the acquired thinking that is targeted and that they're doing. So that's what we were doing. We were looking at mentor text and transfer of learning. So I'm always going to go to pedagogy because that's the most important thing. People could be like, look what I did with ChatGPT and look what I did with whatever. I don't care. I want to hear about the pedagogy. And I want to hear about how it's changing students' ability to become better at what the task is at hand. So we decided we were going to embrace the opportunities of ChatGPT for us. Now, students cannot touch ChatGPT at the 7-year-old level. The rule is if you're under 13, you shouldn't be using it. And if you're over 13, you need parental permission. That will change, that will shift, I'm sure. We're always going to need at least parental permission for under 13, but right now they're not even saying that. So students in this classroom never touched GPT at all. That was us. So here's what we did. So we wanted the kids to write a short story. And at first we just wanted to introduce them to ChatGPT. So this teacher, and this is what I mean by Tracy, she is a very talented teacher. We decided that the kids would get into groups and that they would pick one element of a short story. So you can see she has in this first picture, she has like setting, she has the theme, she has a supporting character, and each of those placards went out to the different groups. And on the back, if the kid was like, what do you mean by theme? She had examples. So she had that scaffolded, which is like mind-blowing to me. I loved it. Now you can see in the third picture, we have some students there who are picking the main character together. They're thinking about it, they're coming up with it. And I want to, the little kid in Star Wars, that I just want to point him out because, or in the Star Wars shirt. He is a kid who, I live in San Diego, so I live on the border of Mexico and California. And this little boy, his dad lives in Tijuana. His mom lives and actually works at the school, and she lives in San Diego. But he spends his weekends in Tijuana where he speaks mostly Spanish, and at his home, it's mostly Spanish. And it's only been about in the last year that he has really learned to speak Spanish, thanks to Tracy a lot. She's really helped with that. And her, I'm sure her first grade teacher, who's also a superstar, helped. But here's a kid that if we give him a blank sheet of paper, with him learning English, he's going to struggle for a little while to learn like enough English and enough structure to really write a story. So if we started to write stories, we'd kind of be leaving him out a little bit. But ChatGPT gives us an opportunity to be a little bit more equitable and think about the kid who's an English as a second language learner, to think about the kid who might have dyslexia and getting words on a page are a little harder, and to think about the kid who's super advanced. We have them. I have a kid and we think he should be in 5th grade next, who can do all this and now can take it to the next level. And ChatGPT gives us this like story starter that allows, maybe the Star Wars kid to just add a few details to the story ChatGPT is going to produce. And the kid, his name is Alex, who's super advanced, to really go for it now if he wants to. So what we did is we had the kids pick these main characters, all these story elements. Then we went to this prompt and we wrote, and I put in a computer and she put in a computer to get different, different things for the story. We said, so you're a children's book author, write a very short story. And often ChatGPT's idea of very short and mine are different. So sometimes I have to be like, a 200-word story or a 100-word story. But for an audience of second graders, because I'm trying to get it to give me like very less complex wording at the beginning, because I want the kids to add the complexity. Using these short story elements. So we went to the group who picked setting and we said, okay, what's your setting? And then we typed it in there. Okay, who has time? And we picked in the time and we put it into this prompt. Then then ChatGPT produced the story. The first time we did this, we were like, oh, we better cover it up first and see what ChatGPT writes, right? Because you never know. But it never wrote anything bad. And we know that ChatGPT won't use curse words, won't do things that are inappropriate right now. So I think that didn't need to happen, but we didn't know at the beginning. So what happened, if we look at this next scenario, is that we took those elements. The main character in this case was a dragon. The supporting character was a dog. The setting was, of course, summer break. They're kids. It was like May. The setting was also outer space, which happens every time you talk to kids about a short story. Someone dies is the event or problem, and the theme was friendship. So we put all that in back. If I go back to this prompt, we put all those right after that, and ChatGPT produced a story. You can see this little girl is reading the story. That's the first thing that we did. We just let them read what ChatGPT produced, and they were like into it. They were on the edge of their seats. Like they had just made a story, and this, like, I called it a robot because that was, I thought, language that they could understand. This robot just produced this story for them. And they were like, we're the creators of the story. And they were so into it. Now they came up and they read like a paragraph at a time. That's not super inventive, but it's also something that kids need to do. So some of the words that ChatGPT used, and we got better at the prompting structure a little bit later, but we're a little bit beyond the zone of proximal development for some of the second graders at this class. And so when they walked up, I was like, oh, this is not going to be pretty. How are they going to get it? But I don't know what happened. It's as if the excitement took over and they had no problem with words that I would have thought an average second grader would have problems with. Maybe I just don't know second graders well enough, but they read the stories and they were excited. And then they were raising their hand. They're like, and they're thinking that I'm like the ChatGPT person because I come in and do all the technology. They're like, can you get me an account? Like, can you just do, come on, just me. Like, I won't tell anyone. Like, that's the kind of thing that they were just so excited. So the teacher and I kind of looked at each other and we just sort of knew that the next step was going to be for these groups to write their own stories and put them into Book Creator. And they would take a paragraph, and I'll show you in a second. So they would come to me with their story elements. ChatGPT would write them, or I would do it, and then it would be written. And then I would copy and paste that into a Google Doc. And from the Google Doc, their job was to take a paragraph and put it on one side of a page of Book Creator, and then do an image on the next. Because in Book Creator, you can go to Canva and create an image. You could even use the AI tool in Canva to do a text to image, so they could look at their story and tell the text to image prompt what they were looking for. And so they took their next story that they did, and they did them actually in groups of 4. I think I might do it in groups of 2 or even alone next time, because they kind of got in fights. Like, I don't want a dragon, because here's what happened. When we did this one story with this dragon and this outer space, kids started to say, that was a good story, but like outer space didn't work, really. Dragons in outer space, it wasn't, and ChatGPT did a really good story about it. But they started to have these critical conversations about that setting didn't work. I think if we would have not had a dragon and we would have had another dog, it probably would have been better. And I started to hear kids talking, and I was like, going to the teacher, I'm like, do seven-year-olds talk like this? Because my 7th graders never talk like this about stories. And she was like, no, this is crazy. And the principal came in, and soon the superintendent's coming in, and like listening to these conversations these kids are having about what makes a good story. And I was like, no worksheet in the history of mankind, it gets kids to talk this way. And it was just, I was like, hold the phone. Wow, this is going to change things. If kids in 2nd grade are thinking about story elements this way, and they continue to do something like this, by the time they would get, I taught 7th and 8th grade language arts, finally, by the time they got to me, they could write a good story. Because I'm here to tell you, 7th graders do not write great stories. Maybe 5% of them do, because they're still in that outer space thing. They want a magic pizza in outer space. And this gives them the opportunity to be like, yeah, that didn't work out. Let me just go back in and change outer space for New York City and see what happens. And they can do that in no amount of time. And it's just mind blowing. I mean, please, I beg you to try this with kids. You will be like, where was this when I was 7 years old? So the next thing we did is we had them go into Book Creator. And you can see with this one, that was one of the paragraphs that ChatGPT produced, but he made it a little better. I think words like suggested might not have been a word that this kid had chosen, but now it's seeing that instead of saying said Chloe or whatever, now it's seeing that you can rephrase that. Now he is seeing that you can rephrase that in different ways. And it becomes this incredible mentor opportunity. Am I going to have students do this all the time? No. This just becomes one of those exercises for getting kids to critically think about stories. So this is just a picture of the book, but then over on the other side, he was able to take like some of those words in the story, go over into Canva, go to text to image, and up came some of the things that he wanted. I think actually he used AutoDraw for the bear and the cow, because that's who they were. They were bears and cows. But look at the sky. And now I'm thinking in 3rd grade or 4th grade, you could now bring in some of those words of that sky into the story. Like it can just keep getting better and better and better as we go. But you think about this as a story starter extraordinaire, instead of going to something like Teacher Pay Teachers for a story starter. Your story starter is the collaboration between the student and ChatGPT or some AI. I'm a big fan of staying in ChatGPT for a while, because then we learn the prompting structures that are important. So what we got from this lesson, we got help for our struggling. There's a mistake in my writing. Sorry about that. When I was going back into Canva, I had some issues, but we got help for our struggling students, not out. For our dyslexic kids, our kids who are English as a second language learners, the ones who are still reading at kindergarten level. This gave them, because we produced those stories, it gave them a starter story, and then they started to add dialogue. They started to add adjectives. They started to add components that they wanted to add from that original starter story. So like every kid was on an equal playing field, whether or not you had parents who could help you write a story, or you were a kid who went home to a house in which parents couldn't help you because they speak Spanish. We're now all at the same level, and you're just going to make little tweaks that'll help outside of your zone of proximal development. It became this mentor text for jumping off point for all the learners. It was a story starter. It started these critical conversations around these story elements. It created a deeper understanding, a really, really deeper understanding of what makes a compelling story. The conversations these 7-year-olds were having about that blew my mind. And as an ex-7th, or I taught 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds, I can't even imagine what I could do with those kids with this kind of activity now, because narrative stories are not my favorite unit as a 7th grade teacher. We'll just put it at that. And it also allowed these kids to see what AI is and what it can help us do when we work in collaboration with it. I don't want them to automatically think I'm going to put a story prompt into ChatGPT, or I'm sorry, a writing assignment into ChatGPT and just cut and paste it. I want them to see there's a collaborative process, that it takes both of us. And when we don't teach kids that, that's when they will use it for what most of the nation or most of the world is thinking will happen. They're just going to use it to cheat on everything. Of course they will. I would, if no teacher taught me how to use it. So I think we're past the point of no return. We've got to now show students. And remember, no student touched ChatGPT in this. And if a 7-year-old can do it, holy Toledo, what could a high schooler do in that same situation? Or even taking parts of their favorite novel and then seeing what they could change about it, whatever you wanted it to be. But I did a TikTok on this. I also did an Instagram reel. But I have a link right here to this actual classroom example where I'm explaining it. So if you ever want to hear it again, it's in under 2 minutes, kind of telling you what I've done here in 23 minutes. But now, as we promised, for those of you who are with us, it's time for questions. We only have about 5 minutes for questions, and I don't see any that have come in. So if you're still with us, I can't tell who's still with us, but
we have quite a few folks still with us, but I haven't seen any questions come in.
oh, well, the link, we'll get that. Yes, there's a link to this book which you can have, and we'll get that in there. There you go. And if anyone couldn't get to it, let me know, because I could have done it wrong.
I know I tested it. It works just fine. Yeah.
So, and if you missed the very beginning when we gave that, hopefully you got to the part, you're very welcome, Jason, but you got the part that we did these with 7-year-olds. So if we can do it with 7-year-olds, you could do it with just about anybody, including an adult. Do you see value in repeating this activity? Oh, yes. I would repeat this activity, not like all the time, but I would definitely practice this story starter mentor text situation at least 3 or 4 times a year, especially for kids who are learning early how to write. And in 7th and 8th grade, 12 and 13-year-olds, I would want to kind of, they've learned some bad habits, right? Maybe we can help, ChatGPT can help us get rid of some of those bad habits.
I like that a lot.
And the most important part, since there aren't any questions coming in quite yet, and maybe don't have any, but the most important part for me was that mentor text that we often cannot give kids in the same way. We can give it from a professionally produced book, but these kids wrote that story. This is a story they wrote, so that's what was important to me. And they saw how quickly it could be written. And to be honest, ChatGPT, it was high interest. It did a good job. Yes, it will be on YouTube, right?
Yeah, so right after this will go live on YouTube. And then tomorrow, everyone will receive a link to it on YouTube also. Oh, there you go, Holly. Gabby has a question. And thank you, Wendy. That was a really great question about repeating.
And also, yes, please do share it, because I want people to think of this rather than like, I can't use ChatGPT with 2nd graders. We're not asking you to use ChatGPT. We're asking you to use ChatGPT to uplift pedagogy. So what is the best AI tool you have seen to simplify the Lexile level on dense text? So I love Diffit as a differentiator for text. So that's probably where I would go. I'm not saying that that's the best. That's just the one that I love. I've also used it with ChatGPT, to be honest. And the students just copied the ChatGPT story and added images? No. So thank you for clarifying that question, Derek. Actually, I copied the story that ChatGPT produced, and I asked it to be like 5 paragraphs. They then copied that into Book Creator, but their job was to make that paragraph better. It was to expand on it as much as they could. So it became almost like a sentence starter, a paragraph starter that they then added dialogue, adjectives, things to make it compelling. And they were really talking about that too. Like they would be like, Ms. Clark, come in. Does this make it compelling? Like, and I'd say, well, let's talk about what does compelling mean? And it was so great. It was just so great. Have you used Padlet to create AI drawings from text? Yes. And I have used Padlet. I agree it's easier. I also am not the biggest fan of Canva, so I would agree with you. I think it'll get better in terms of the AI prompting. There are a lot of tools that do a better job, like Firefly in Microsoft. Matt Miller has a blog post that just came out about 10 different AI image generators that you might want to take a look at on ditchthattextbook.com. And I think Canva has a way to go with that image generation. But the critical thinking that my students have to think about, like, here's my paragraph. What do I need to put into this text to image AI generator to make a picture that works? And I see them spending a lot of time on that. And I think to myself, at a 7-year-old level, that's critical thinking. Can you send?
I think, yeah, which link? Ditchthattextbook.com, diffit.me. I put both of them in. Well, we have time for one more question. No, Catherine, no problem. The chats go so fast. No problem at all. We have time for one more question. If there is another question. Otherwise, I'm going to stop the live stream.
And I will tell you that Matt Miller and I do a podcast called the Digital Learning Podcast. And here's all of my information in the next part of the book. But the Digital Learning Podcast, we're talking a lot about AI because Matt and I spend a lot of time training schools on AI. And we see what principals are thinking, what superintendents are thinking, what teachers are doing. So we try and share that out. So that's just the Digital Learning Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts.